Hey guys, and welcome to the next installment in our A-Push lecture videos. And today we're going to take a look at actually the beginnings of period two. So we are just chugging along here, and we're moving now into the actual colonial settlement of the British colonies. And we're going to focus a lot today on a couple major themes, mostly focusing on the different regions of the British colonies. We'll take a look at how some of the colonies are different from that in the South, obviously, versus the New England colonies, and then you also have your middle ones in between. And what we're going to tend to see here with this is that the New England colonies are kind of settling around the religious freedom aspect and kind of thinking about the gold, God, and glory that we mentioned within period one. And a lot of them are family based, religiously based for as far as their reasonings, and it kind of creates a whole different atmosphere and culture compared to that of like the Southern colonies or the Chesapeake colonies, which are more about profit. They're more about the gold, looking for cash crops. We're also going to focus a little bit on the transatlantic trade as far as the Middle Passage, the relationships between that of the Europeans, Africans, and North American colonists. We'll also take a look at how each of these different colonies interacted between Native Americans, and then also how slavery kind of impacted them as well. But for this lecture video, we're going to focus mostly on the first topic that I talked about, which is kind of breaking down the regions of the British colonies. And I'm going to try to break these up into clips where we'll start with the southern colonies, and then we'll do one for the New England and then also for the middle colonies to try to keep it as simple as possible for you. So for this first lesson here, we're going to kind of break down the differences here between the different branches of colonies in the English settlements. So we're going to start our story here with Jamestown in 1607. Yes, I know that there was Roanoke beforehand, but you know what? Roanoke was a failed colony, and we don't like failures here in A-Push, so we're going to focus first with Jamestown. And we're talking, obviously, with living so close to this region, talking about the Chesapeake Bay area in Virginia, and we want to kind of think about why are they showing up? Why are they coming? Okay, and how do they create a colony? Well, again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of them are coming over for the profit motive. A lot of these are single men or they're married men that are coming over by themselves in support for their families. So there's not a whole lot of women, there's not a whole lot of children, and a lot of them are coming over through joint stock companies. And specifically with Jamestown, the Virginia company is going to be the company that brings them over to the New World. And again, we talked about this idea of mercantilism in the first unit, that this idea of joint stock companies are basically private investors who are looking to make profit off of something taking place in the New World, whether it is gold, whether it is cash crops, it could be fur, whatever it might be, but they are looking to make a profit. So in order to gain men to come over on this Virginia company, the king's going to recruit them and basically promise them the search of gold, the search of prosper, the search of land, and it's going to actually be very successful. And if we think about with the movie, this is the movie Pocahontas, although there is a whole bunch of historical fallacies in that movie, I believe there is actually a scene where Governor Ratcliffe sings a song about digging for gold. That's their main reason. They're coming over to make profit. When they first get there, they struggle. It is a huge struggle for them to build forts, to try to survive, to grow crops, to basically live. And they did not prepare for a long stay. They did not prepare for cold winters. And a lot of them are facing starvation. So there is a huge amount of struggle here taking place in the New World already at Jamestown, and it's going to have to be turned around by one man. That one man is going to be John Smith, pictured here. And he's going to basically take control, and he has this famous quote, "He who will not work will not eat," basically talking about how every man is going to have to contribute to society, to the colony itself, and how they're all going to have to carry their own weight. So with this Jamestown colony trying to get up on its feet, you finally start to have men who are kind of contributing to the society, contributing to the colony. They're growing food rather than just simply searching for gold and silver and trying to make a quick buck. But they're also facing other diseases they can't control. We know this is a very kind of a swampy, very humid region here in the Chesapeake area, and Jamestown is having a problem with diseases. Outbreaks that are taking place here, many of them are dying. They're also having territorial control problems with the Powhatan Indians. They are having border conflicts. They are fighting for land, essentially. And as you can see in the picture here, you're often having raids by the Native Americans who are killing off some of the settlers, and then also vice versa, where you have settlers who are killing the Native Americans. So there is a lot of tension here and a lot of issues that are starting to plague the colonists in Jamestown, and it seems like Jamestown is going to be a failure, just like its Roanoke predecessor. So with the Jamestown looking like it's going to be a failure, you have to remember what was the purpose. Remember, the purpose was to come over and make profit for the joint stock investors, and these investors are not getting a return on their original investment. They start to demand the colonists find ways to make money, and eventually a settler named by John Rolfe is going to introduce tobacco, learning that from the Native Americans, and he's going to be able to start harvesting it in large quantities and have these tobacco plants sent back to Europe, and they're going to make the investors very, very wealthy. Tobacco is going to be a huge increase in economic wealth for the colonies. And under the leadership of John Rolfe, Jamestown will become a very, very successful colony because of the tobacco plant making them so much wealth. Eventually, John Rolfe will marry Pocahontas. This is the real Pocahontas, not the Disney version of Pocahontas, who does not fall in love with John Smith. She actually marries John Rolfe, goes back to England with him, and then I believe she dies at a very, very early age. So a very, very sad story for Pocahontas. But because tobacco is so profitable, if you're a businessman, if you're a joint stock company, well, if something's going to make you money, why not make more of it? So what they do is they start building larger plantations. They expand into the area. They expand and create new farms that are creating more tobacco. And it's going to help to expand the Virginia colony. You can kind of see here where they're settling by the year 1700 in the greenish teal color, going all the way out throughout Richmond, Annapolis, of present-day Maryland, all the way up to the border with Delaware. So we're really kind of controlling all the Chesapeake Bay here. The thing we have to think about, though, as Jamestown or as the Virginia colony is expanding and as they're creating more and more tobacco, well, tobacco is a very labor-intensive product. As far as the planting, that's difficult enough itself, but then having to cut the crop, having to dry it out, having to package it in barrels, and having to ship it, this is a very labor-intensive crop, and you're going to have to find enough workers to be able to make this salvageable, to be able to make it economically profitable. So they're going to turn to eventually the indentured servitude. And what the indentured servitude is the way to basically, it's a trade. I'm trading my labor in exchange for a trip to the New World. And if we look at the poster here, we can see it says free land, free ship fare. So that is for anybody, typically poor people who cannot afford their way over, men or women who needed a way to get over. So they would find a businessman who would give them a free ride, and for about 4 to 7 years, they would work for them. And you can see here on their version, it's 7 years to pay back the planter for fare to Virginia. So you work for them for 7 years. You will receive some land, you'll clothing, a place to live, some tools, and then you'll be set free on your way. So it's kind of a way of a trade-off system. Now, was it always a great system? No. In fact, oftentimes indentured servitudes here were treated very badly, and some of them died along the way because it was such an arduous and difficult trip. But it is bringing over a huge amount of people. They're coming over in the thousands because it's better than what's happening. Remember, there's a civil war happening in England, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity if you're not part of the elite status. So for these poor people, it is a way out of that economic woe. And it creates basically what is called the headright system. That's a very good key term to remember, in which basically gives you 50 acres to anyone who is bringing indentured servants to America. So it is incentivizing you to bring other people with you. And in addition to the indentured servitudes, we also have African slaves who are coming over as part of the Middle Passage for the first time in the 1600s. And again, this is going to, we'll get a little bit deeper into what slavery looked like in the Southern colonies. I know we already know a lot about this, and especially from world history, we know about the Middle Passage and how difficult and how terrible the conditions were. But eventually what we'll see is that slavery will completely replace indentured servitude, because the indentured servitudes were not as skilled workers a lot of times. They also fought back and they were able to rebel. We'll see with Bacon's Rebellion. So there were some issues with indentured servitude that eventually gets phased out, and slavery becomes an easier, more efficient method of cheap labor for the plantation work owners. So again, we already know a lot about the Middle Passage and the difficulties of the trip that was made for the Africans who were against their will. Here again is just kind of an image showing how tightly packed that they were. They were typically chained, stacked on rows atop of each other. You can see them here kind of filling out the whole bottom of the ship. It was usually called the coffin position because that was how you would lay in a coffin, so not a whole lot of space. You can see they're tightly packed, so much so. Again, the idea is that we want to maximize profits by shipping them on and getting as many of them on as possible. We know about the brutalities of the trip as well through primary source knowledge that they were beaten. Sometimes they were thrown off overboard just to scare those, being fed very minimal, just enough to keep them alive until they got to the New World. If they ever resisted, they would force them to eat. They would take like a reverse bear trap and basically force it down their throats. They would make them dance, humiliate them in front of each other. So there's a lot of terrible things that are happening across this Middle Passage. And then when they would get to the New World, whether it be in Cuba, whether it be in Jamestown, whether it be in South America, wherever it might be, they're being held up for auction and families are being split apart. Men, women, and children are being sold separately. So it's really a terrible process here that is overtaking the indentured servitude system or the headright system that originally began in Jamestown. So one of the last things here we're going to take a look at with the southern colonies is the idea of governance. And we already mentioned a little bit in period 1 that the British colonies were actually different from that of the Spanish and the French. Remember, the Spanish and the French basically ruled as an autocracy with having a strong military commander or some sort of monarch to forcibly control all aspects of life in their respective colonies. However, the British were a lot different. In a lot of cases, they had some sort of self-governance. You still might have a governor that was appointed by the King of England. However, on a colonial or on a local level, the colonists are able to democratically elect themselves or choose how they want to be representative. And one of the earliest examples of that is going to be the House of Burgesses. And I want to make sure you remember that name because it's going to be a good example maybe on an essay question to talk about self-governance or salutary neglect as far as how the colonists are able to govern themselves. And this House of Burgesses is seen as the first version of a legislative branch in the United States or in the New World. And even though Virginia was a royal colony and was dictated by the governor, again, they didn't have a whole lot of power. This idea of salutary neglect, where as long as they were making the profit for England, they were fine with that. So a lot of the important decisions, such as different taxes and local laws, were coming down to the House of Burgess. One of the critiques or one of the negative impacts of, however, the House of Burgess that not everybody felt like they were represented, and most of the representatives were coming from the higher elite classes, and the lower levels of the peasants, the indentured servants, the lower class that are coming over to the New World do not feel like they have the support that they need by the House of Burgess, and oftentimes, mostly in western parts of Virginia, they are under the attack of Native Americans. They are being suffered economically through low tobacco prices. And a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon is going to lead an uprising of poor farmers against Virginia's governor for not protecting them. And it's going to start Bacon's Rebellion. It's going to really be kind of the first precursor to when your government does not fulfill your needs to rip it up and get a new one. However, unfortunately for the rebellion, when Nathaniel Bacon is killed in a conflict, the rebellion sort of dies out, and they're not successful in taking over, and they don't really make any sort of governmental changes in the Virginia colony. But what this does is this is really kind of the turning point as far as a labor system where the Virginians decide then instead of having to deal with these pesky ingrates or indentured servants, let's turn more to the slaves because they're less upkeep. They are cheaper, obviously, because you can keep them for free forever instead of losing them after a few years, and they are not causing as much issues as the indentured servants are. So this is really kind of going to bring an end to the indentured servitude in the New World.